Greetings and welcome to the Picks Podcast for UFC 305. As always, I'm your host, Luca Fury. This time I am joined by Liam Heslin. We're going to be breaking down the entire main card here of UFC 305. Of course, headlined by the middleweight title fight between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. Should be a fun one there based on the style matchup, but also the trash talk that we've had going into it. Certainly one of the more heated rivalries for Israel here. Of course, we are going to be breaking down, like I said, the whole card here on the podcast, but we do have a bunch more content available over on the Patreon. As you see, based on the link there below, patreon.com/FuriesFightPicks. We have a bunch of other content there, such as articles, pre-fight shows, post-fight shows, and of course, most importantly of all, you can find all of our official bets there as well. We do have a bunch of plays up right now, and we have obviously all third-party track results and everything there. We have, we're actually on pace for almost 100 units now, actually over 100 units, for the year. We'll also be probably over 400 units lifetime by the end of the year as well. Again, all third-party tracked and verified. And our average bet size is only 1.75 units. So it's not like we're padding bets with a bunch of 20-unit plays or 10-unit plays or anything like that. So again, check it all out now, right now, at patreon.com/FuriesFightPicks. Other than that, we'll get started with the fight breakdowns here. Starting first with the main event, we do have pretty much pick-em odds here between Israel Adesanya, the challenger, going to take back his UFC middleweight title against the current champion, Dricus du Plessis. Currently, it is dead even at a pick-em -10 both ways. Start first with you, Liam. What are your thoughts on this middleweight matchup?
You know, it's an interesting fight, Luca, because on the one hand, you have DDP, a guy I've made a lot of money with. People think of him as awkward. They think of him as a little bit, less than meets the eye, right? But the results have always been there. He's been a very effective fighter throughout his career, but a lot of what he does is a little bit janky looking. Like he takes a lot of half beats and then he throws in combination. He blitzes in and he drops his head down in weird ways. You see the clip going viral of him headbutting Sean Strickland in the hip. I said it's the new MMA meta. The guy just has a weird way about him, but despite his awkward tendencies, he's a very effective fighter. And sometimes people get lost in mixed martial arts thinking about the techniques. And I always think about who's really effective, who's really dangerous, who's going out there to finish the fights. And I think that in a lot of ways, Dricus du Plessis checks those boxes. He's gone the distance twice. Extreme Couture has the game plan for getting this guy to go the distance. It was Sean Strickland and it was Brad Tavares. But otherwise, this guy is known for still knocks. He goes out there, puts power on people and puts them away. He also has a very good ground game that he's shown off in terms of the Robert Whittaker fight. Not only does Robert Whittaker engage him in the clinch, but it's du Plessis who then flatbacks him, with the side headlock, ends up on top in a half Darce situation, throwing elbows and cuts him open. I don't think Whittaker ever recovered from that first round of hell with du Plessis. And so now he just has this track record and he's cashed me tickets a number of times, plus 108 against Tavares, plus 108 against Strickland, plus 300 against Robert Whittaker. But I also have to acknowledge that the one time I faded him was with a somewhat similar stylistic archetype, which was Darren Till. I bet Till at plus 160 and it looked real bad in round one. It looked real good in round two and it looked real bad again in round three. And if Darren Till didn't have, sophomoric takedown defense, then he probably could have beaten Dricus du Plessis, especially at that time. But du Plessis, he's had the nose, fixed, right? He had that problem that he had with his breathing through his nose. And then he just went out there and threw 120 some odd significant strikes, 130 significant strikes against Strickland, a guy who's very high volume. And he got 6 takedowns in the process, meaning he's going out there and doing a lot with his takedowns, with his offense. And I felt like it was a very close fight. It could have went either way. But when I look at the du Plessis side, I say, man, he's a very impressive fighter. But the one downside to his style is he's there to be hit at times. He does come in a little bit reckless with his chin up in the air. And I think that there's an ability for Izzy to catch him coming in. That is how Darren Till had some success. But Till himself, when he's talking about this week, giving unsolicited advice to Adesanya, he's saying, I opted for these elbows. I opted for some of these weapons that got me out of position, and that's why I was getting taken down. He said, you're going to want to use knees, intercept this guy, go with straight shots through the middle. And Israel Adesanya is very capable of those things at his best. Here's the problem for me. On the other side of this matchup is a guy who I've overrated at times in the past. I thought Israel Adesanya was the genuine article in terms of what I had seen defending takedowns, right? He went out there against Derek Brunson, never let him get close to the hips, used his strikes to punish his attempts to wrestle. And Derek Brunson is a little bit, out of position at times pursuing his wrestling. There's no doubt about that. But he is a credentialed wrestler. He does have the ability to mix between different phases, and he could never get close to Adesanya. The same thing about Vettori. The first time they fought, he had a little bit of meager success trying to wrestle and grapple with Adesanya. But then what you see in, the subsequent bout, he's not even able to sniff a takedown, get close to anything. Jared Cannonier could physically grab him, but he couldn't rip him to the floor. He couldn't make anything happen from the clinch. So in this kind of fight, I say to myself, okay, you got an Israel Adesanya who last time out, do you want to attribute it to he had a bad performance because he had a DUI and because, maybe he overlooked Sean Strickland and it was a letdown spot? That's what some people are arguing. But on the other side, you look at the fact he's 35 years of age, right? He's not getting any younger. And he went out there and kind of laid an egg in Australia last time. Now you're asking him to have a better performance. Clearly, he's going to come in motivated in terms of the rivalry here, but you've got a 30-year-old against a 35-year-old. You got a former champ against a current champ. And so it does make it hard for me to just blindly trust Israel Adesanya when we know he's got a history of blowing it in title fights as a favorite, right? We know against Jan Blachowicz, he was minus 2XX, goes out there and drops the ball. And what happened there? Is he less skilled than Jan Blachowicz? It looked like it, right? On the feet, he actually got outlanded every single round at distance. But on top of that, he was getting taken down multiple times and just accepting it, laying on his back, playing from the full guard. The difference is Jan Blachowicz is more than happy hang out on top, set up a campsite, and just wait for that 5 rounds to tick by. And I think that Du Plessis, we saw against Whitaker, he's extremely aggressive when he gets the fight to the mat in terms of passing, in terms of looking to get on top and do damage. And I do think the question I've always had about Adesanya is not, can he defensively wrestle? He can. But what happens if we get past that first step? And I said before the Strickland fight, you guys can go back and fact check this, but I had said that I thought we were in for the most dominant wrestling performance since Kamaru Usman against this opponent. And he went out there and got 6 takedowns. No guy's ever done that to Strickland in the interim between those Kamaru Usman fights and Du Plessis. But the problem is Du Plessis didn't have that much control in that fight. So he spent a lot of energy going for the takedowns, but he wasn't able to really consolidate. Strickland's a lifelong jiu-jitsu guy. He came up in that system. He's very difficult to get a hold of. The extreme couture guys just drill like, get away from me, jiu-jitsu. Not like, let's re-engage and go for a submission. It's like, get off me so I can hurt you again. And I think that what we saw from Du Plessis is he found a way to win. And in this fight, he's going to come out here, and I think a smart fighter finding a way to win against Adesanya, you pressure, you look for takedowns, you try and put this guy on the back foot and on his ass. And if you do that, he's probably going to be very uncomfortable, and he might start thinking about all the money and all the things he's got going on outside the cage, and does he really want to do this anymore? But he's a highly motivated guy. He's a former champion. He's got that pedigree. Do I feel convicted enough to go lay minus 110 against him in this spot when basically his legacy is on the line? Not really, right? So for me, I feel compelled towards the fight not to go the distance here. There's a lot of shit talk. There's a lot of, I think, finishing paths for both guys. Du Plessis, they call him still knocks for a reason. He has power. His ability to submit opponents is nothing to sneeze at. And on the other side, Israel Adesanya, prolific knockout artist. Maybe not in all the 5-round title fights in the UFC, but if you look at his body of work, from boxing to kickboxing to mixed martial arts, he's knocked out many of his opponents. And by the way, Du Plessis, anytime he's lost a fight before, he's been finished, right? It's like the guy has gone out there and gotten cleaned up by Roberto Soldic. We have to remember. It was 8 fights ago. It happened, though. Then when you're looking at the other side, it's like, he got submitted once in the past as well for Du Plessis. He hasn't been making it the distance in these fights that he's lost in his career. So I think it's a great fight. I think it's an honest scrap. But last time that Israel Adesanya fought, I made a whole write-up about how Sean Strickland was value. Bet the fight not to go the distance. He hurts him in round 1 and then lets him skate the rest of the fight and just doesn't put any more pressure on it. I honestly couldn't believe it. But that's the nature of fighting, right? And I think that for Du Plessis, it's win by any means necessary. If he gets a win over Adesanya, it doesn't matter how he gets it. It doesn't matter if he knocks him out. It doesn't matter if it's a decision. It doesn't matter if he submits him. He's just going to take that and run with it to the bank. And by the way, Dana's already said, event in Africa, all these different boxes we're going to check for you because he's 30 years of age. And they think, hey, if this guy wins, if he can get this win, this scalp, then we can really push this guy to the moon. But Israel Adesanya is like 20x him on social media. He's a huge star. And the UFC didn't say, go back and earn it again, kid. They said something wasn't right, right? And this is Dana White's words. He was like, something was not right about Israel. He looked slow. He looked sluggish. He looked lethargic. Then, of course, the bookies who already had this information, they were like, yeah, we know why. But then we all get it 2 weeks after the fight that the DUI happened. Is that all of it to blame? Or is it the fact that he's 35 and kind of distracted by other things and maybe doesn't really want this anymore? Like a guy who, frankly, needs this shit to continue being a, successful person in life. So for me, it's a tricky fight, man. I lean Du Plessis, but if I'm the odds maker, I make it minus 102, plus 102. It's like, where is the real give here? I don't know. I think there's a lot of questions in this fight.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one in my opinion. I would agree with that. One thing about Israel, I have concerns about where he is as a fighter now, exactly what version we're going to get of him. Obviously, yes, he did not look particularly good, to say the least, against Sean Strickland. Looked like a shell of himself out there. And I think some of the stuff he said outside the cage, both around that fight, since that fight, and even leading up to this one, has been signs of a fighter with their foot out the door. He does not seem as actually into it as he usually is at the press conference. He's trying to deliver these one-liners, and you see him there, he'll go and like pick up the mic and he'll say it, and it just falls flat, but then he puts the mic down and like sits there like he said something really cool, and then no one says any reaction, and then he kind of just, you can see even on his face, he kind of looks around like, oh, damn, not really on my game here. That's been happening over and over and over, and for multiple press conferences now. He just doesn't seem like he's quite in it. Kind of reminds me of Conor, what we've seen from him at times, where some of his flat performances, where you see the lead up, remember, against Dustin Poirier, where he was nice guy Conor, and everyone was like, oh, maybe this is a good thing. And it's like, well, actually, a guy who's normally basically a psychopath leading up to the fight, him suddenly being kind of dejected, actually not really a good thing. And we saw that in that performance. So with Israel, I have some concerns about him actually being still a guy who really wants this all that much, like you mentioned. Also, I think what's very, very much worth noting, his fights against Alex Pereira. He obviously had that rivalry with him. He had lost some fights against him. And then he went out and won the most recent one. And it seemed like everyone's basically pretending like he won the 4 fights between them, despite having a losing record there, 1-3. On top of that, it seems like since then, after getting the win, it almost seems like Izzy, that was his Mount Everest. And since then, he just kind of feels like he's done everything there is to do in MMA. And he's basically just kind of cashing checks at this point. Certainly what it seemed like against Strickland, not only in the performance, but also the outside the cage stuff. One thing that concerned me was after that loss backstage, his family, I think it was his mom specifically, was like, you're set for life. Even though you lost, who cares? You're fine. And he agreed with it. He wasn't like, oh, no, you don't understand. He was like, yeah, that's true, I guess. And then going into this fight at the press conference, Dricus makes this man cry, literally makes this man cry. And Israel's response is, oh, yeah, I have my family. They're what's really important to me. It's like the dude's already like saying basically, yeah, fighting, I would like this to work out, but if it doesn't, I have more important things. And when you hear a fighter saying that, it is always the signs of the beginning of the end. Not to say he doesn't win this fight, because I still think stylistically it's a very winnable fight for him. But I just don't think we're going to see a consistent, aggressive Izzy back fight in and fight out again. I think this is a guy who's here for sort of some paydays or legacy type fights, and that's about it. Also, if you look back through his record, something that is worth noting and something that I've talked about in the past with him, he's always actually kind of been a hot or cold, inconsistent type of fighter. Going through his results here, we have the Sean Strickland performance last time out. That's the most recent one. Bad performance, obviously. Terrible. Before that, he wins against Alex by KO. He was on his way to losing that one. He was in a bad spot there in the second round. Happened to basically, I don't want to say get lucky, but he got fortunate there. He was not playing possum like some people tried to make it out afterwards. Before that, he loses to Alex by TKO. Before that, he has the absolutely putrid fight against Jared Cannonier, where he basically avoided the entire fight and jabbed for 5 rounds. Before that, he had a somewhat good performance against Robert Whittaker in the rematch. Before that, a somewhat good performance, but against Marvin Vettori. Before that, the loss against Jan Blachowicz, gets outstruck, as you mentioned, Liam, and also, of course, taken down. And then before that, this is his last great performance against a great fighter, where he actually looked like a world beater. The guy who's in the highlights, the guy who's going out there, doing the MMA moves in his opponent's corpse. That was against Paulo Costa. That was all the way back September of 2020. And obviously, we've seen since then, Paulo Costa has kind of fallen off himself. But at the time, he was considered a great contender. There was actually a lot of people thought he was going to beat Israel. And so you go back, it hasn't been very often that Israel has actually had a great world-beating type of performance. So can he have it here? Potentially. Maybe he goes out there and just starches Dricus right from the get-go. But if history's any indication, he's generally not actually that dominant of a fighter, is he? And on top of that, there's also another trend you can actually point out between those fights. He struggles when he is pressured. When he is fighting off of his back foot, he does not do as well. Whether you're threatening with takedowns, whether you're pressuring him with strikes and getting in his face, that was one of the key things that Sean Strickland did there. Got in his face the entire time. But if you look at that fight, you look at some of Izzy's other performances, even against guys he's struggling against because they're pressuring him, look at the moments, again, like against Strickland, where Strickland stops the pressure. All of a sudden, Izzy starts to do well. Then the pressure comes back on, and Izzy starts to do poor again. So that's a very consistent thing with him. He does not tend to handle pressure all that well. Now, sometimes he can counter you if you really leave the opportunities, like, say, against Derek Brunson. Tried to pressure him, but just did not do it effectively at all. He can go out and actually have success in that case. And Dricus, he's definitely aggressive. He's definitely going to be pressure. But oh my goodness, along with that comes some of the worst striking defense you have ever seen, some of the worst propensity to put his head on a silver platter, just begging to be knocked out. It happens over and over again. He starts huffing and puffing. He seems to get a second wind multiple times throughout his bouts where he's doing well, huffing and puffing, seems like he's gassing, and then all of a sudden he turns back the clock and suddenly he's fresh again. Happens repeatedly in his fights. In those moments where he starts to huff and puff and starts to get especially sloppy, that's where Izzy's going to have his best chance, because Dricus is just, oh my goodness, I cannot stress it enough, leaves his head on a silver platter. The Darren Till fight, I mean, you can go back through some of his wins. You don't even have to look at his losses. Just look at his wins where he's struggled, then gone on to win despite having some of these massive glaring issues. So if Izzy's going to win this fight, obviously he has to stay off of the mat for one. But two, I think it's very important he has to avoid the pressure. If he's getting pressured, yes, he could land the knockout like he did against Alex in his most recent bout against him. But even look at what happened there. Why was he struggling? Why was he almost finished against the fence himself? Because of what I just said. He was against the fence getting pressured. So Dricus in that instance maybe has Izzy's back against the cage, but he has to be careful about the home run hit coming in return. He does have to still be careful of the counters from Izzy. But generally speaking, I think Izzy's best chance in this fight is to keep it at range. He has a few inches height and reach advantage, and try to pick him apart with objectively superior technique. Like, there's no question Israel is the superior technical striker. They're not even close in that regard. The thing is, Dricus probably has more one-punch power. He's more aggressive. He's going to get in his face. He's also going to be mixing in the takedown. So, again, if you're looking at this fight going well for Izzy and he ends up going on to win it, he's going to have to avoid that pressure. He's going to have to avoid the takedowns. That seems difficult for me to see happening. I think if he wins it, he's still probably going to struggle at some point. And then, like I said, with the Alex fight most recently, uncorks the Hail Mary. So I think Israel's path to victory is struggling at points before pulling out the win, whereas Dricus, his path to victory can be a bit more one-sided, a bit more dominant. And that's if we're even seeing the best Israel Adesanya. Of course, if we get a flat version like against Strickland, it's even an easier fight for Dricus. So I think in a way this is Dricus's fight to lose, but at the same time, the way he fights so often, he gives his opponents every chance to win the fights. He fights in a way that is asking to lose, basically. I think we will see those chances here again for Israel, and that's why, despite what I said, I'm still not all that big on Dricus here in terms of my confidence in him. I think the fight should be close in the odds. I think it should be a near pick'em. I do favor Dricus slightly. I have not got to the window yet. I would like to actually get a plus number on him if I'm going to do that. Right now, it has shifted to basically dead even pick'em across the board. So at this point in time, I don't have any interest in laying action yet, but I leave the potential opening to possibly play Dricus coming up with, maybe between now and the fight tomorrow. There could be some potential for some line moves there. But overall, I just think at this point in time, you have a guy who's a handful of years younger. He also seems to be much more motivated and on point at this point in his career. In the case of Izzy, one thing I will say going in his favor, does seem to be a little bit pre versus post USADA thing going on. There's been some training footage out there for the last few months of him, as well as the recent pictures, the official pictures that the UFC put up. And he's definitely more muscular. Not a massive difference, but he clearly has a little bit more muscular, more mass around his entire body. People are saying, oh, he's just flexing his abs. No, he was not just flexing his abs. You can see his shoulders are bigger. His biceps are a little bit bigger. Overall, seems about the same leanness. He's just a little bit more muscular. So maybe that allows him to actually be a bit better than what we've seen even from his prime in the UFC. But one thing I will always point out about the pre and post USADA thing, it doesn't affect power as much as people think. Yes, there was TRT, Vitor Belfort back in the day. He was killing everybody. Aside from that, what we've really seen PEDs mainly do is actually affect guys' cardio and durability. It helps that. So it makes them harder to get knocked out, harder to gas. So in Israel's case, those weren't really his issues here. I guess maybe his durability is better. That could help him against Dricus. But he already on paper probably had the durability and definitely the cardio advantages. So post USAD Izzy, I don't know if it's actually going to play a factor, even if that is, a factor here with him being on, maybe some special sauce. But my point is, I just have more faith in Dricus being a consistent fighter at this time. I've seen better stuff out of him lately, seen better stuff from him in the pre-fight press conference as well. So Dricus will be my official prediction here, ultimately by stoppage. But again, not one that I have a whole lot of confidence in. Remember, though, we do have our official bets over on the Patreon. Again, all third-party tracked and verified, on pace for over 100 units this year, on pace to hit over 400 units lifetime as well. You can check them all out at patreon.com/FuriesFightPicks. As for the co-main event here, we have Steve Erceg at -175, taken on former title challenger Kai Kara-France at +145.
Yeah, this is one I feel a little bit better about. Obviously there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? It's still a fight. He's going to go out there and take risks. And if you had to make one criticism of a guy like Steve Erceg, it's a little bit that he just puts his shit on the line. He's a guy that likes to go out there and strike a little bit, get into exchanges. And Kai Kara-France, city kickboxing mold, right? Just like Adesanya, but not with the great pedigree in kickboxing. It's just that he's got the same kind of fundamental system. And a lot of what they do, paw out the jab, keep it in your face. And that's why pressure can kind of get to these guys, right? If you bring a lot of pressure to a guy who wants to jab all night, you're kind of crowding his ability to jab, right? He wants to be able to set the tone, dictate. And that way, when you're trying to get around it, he can pick the next shot to come behind it. And in the case where the city kickboxing guys throw it, it's not jab, retract. It's jab, hold it in your face so you can't see the follow, and then the next hand comes behind it. If you look at any Kai Kara-France knockout, I guarantee, unless it's like a crazy uppercut or something, it's almost always one hand in front, next hand comes behind it, and they don't see it. And I think that for Erceg, he's a good boxer. I think he's going to be well aware of what Kai Kara-France is bringing to the table. He does a good job hooking off counters as well. So when people are trying to jab with him, he tries to hook and counter them over the top. And he had a lot of success with that against Schnell. Obviously, Schnell is not a very durable fighter. So when he got hit, he just hit the deck. I don't think that's going to happen the first time you hit a guy like Kai Kara-France. But do I think he has the tools to counter the jab? Yes, I do. So then the question is, well, who's the better grappler? Who's got the other ancillary skills if the fight is not a purely striking fight where I think it's competitive, but I would favor Erceg? I think Erceg is the much better grappler here as well. When you look, Shannon Ross is a guy that is historically not very durable at all, right? And that's the big problem with him. One guy has submitted, and it was Steve Erceg. He did hurt him a little bit on the feet, but it was just a transition. Grab, spin, go behind, take the back. You just see he's got a lot of fluidity, a lot of smoothness to his transitions. And when you're talking about this weight class, that's what's key. A lot of the guys that have not succeeded against Kai Kara-France are static wrestlers and grapplers, guys that get to a position, they hold it, they clinch on really strong, and they try and latch on. They burn a lot of energy doing that. And then if they fall off the top, they are not prepared to strike. Rogerio Bontorin is a prime example of that, right? He had a ton of success holding the back, fell over the top, gets hit with a big shot, and the fight changes completely. I was there in person when Kai Kara-France beat Askar Askarov. I didn't agree with the decision, but I knew it was going to go Kai Kara-France's way because the Ohio crowd was going hard against Russia that night. But when you talk about Askar Askarov and what he did, he got to the back body triangle, and then he just was static there, and he didn't really look for the finish. He just wanted to hold on to it. That's exhausting, by the way, if you're standing holding a body triangle. So I think of this fight as Kai Kara-France has pretty decent fundamentals, but if you make it chaotic, he falls apart in the grappling. And I picked Brandon Royval. I picked him as an underdog. It was one of my early, confident underdog plays. I was like, I think Brandon Royval, even if shit goes sideways on the feet, is going to make things crazy for this guy, and he's not going to like it. And that's exactly what happened. And he submitted him in round 2, which was my exact written prediction. I think that Steve Erceg has a very similar path to victory here. I think what he can do is go out there, land some shots on the feet, get some respect. And if you land anything of substance on Kai Kara-France, he has an ingrained reaction to shoot a takedown. It is just built into him. And we saw Erceg go for that guillotine pull against Alessandro Costa. It was nearly wraps. We've also seen him look for the back take. We've seen him get 5 takedowns in 4 UFC fights. So I think of Kai Kara-France as the old guard from this oceanic region. He had his chance at the title. He got finished by Moreno, who hasn't looked good in a fight since. And then we look at his subsequent fight, Albazi, maybe the most pick-offable guy in the top 10 right now, top 5 echelon, right? And he lost the fight. It was close, but he kind of just gave away early rounds there. He was able to storm back late. No 5 rounds to work with. 3 rounds, Steve Erceg. The danger is post-fight letdown off a title. We all know the narratives out there, but it's just, for me, I see a lot of money coming in on Kai Kara France. I get the respect, City Kickboxing and all that. For me, I just think Urseg's the guy right now, and I think he's going to beat him. I think he's going to finish him. I think he's going to submit him.
In the case of Kai Kara France, it's interesting. He's not a particularly hyped guy. He's not, some guy that the UFC's pushing, or you see them, given like the Paddy Pimblett treatment or anything. But I've always felt like he's still kind of a little bit overrated, and his skills are exaggerated. Like the way people talk about him, yeah, he had the title shot and everything. I know. I had the over with him against Brandon Moreno, almost hit. But in general, his skill set, I think he's a good fighter. Don't get me wrong. But I do think he's actually kind of a little bit overrated. Like if you look at his skill set, what is one thing he's actually truly great at? He's decent to good at some things, but he's not truly great at anything. And he has a lot of vulnerabilities, some of which I think we might see here. Obviously, in the case of Urseg, he has some issues with hitability. His chin obviously concerns me. But overall, I think actually with his counter ability, I think he's just a bit of a cleaner, classier striker here. And then more importantly, it's the grappling. Now, I should say on the feet, I don't expect him to go out there and just cruise or anything like that. And in fact, I could actually see him struggling because of, again, the hitability issues, the chin issues. I think that Kai is, I guess, one area where people actually do properly rate him. He does have some decent power for this division. So potentially maybe you could crack Urseg with something good here. So I think while it's not a, he's like a fish out of water on the feet or just dead in the water or anything like that, Urseg, I think obviously it's still winnable fight for him, as I mentioned, for some of the reasons. That's obviously the path of by far the most resistance. And I think it'd be very foolish to try to pursue it that way. The obvious path here is to pursue the grappling, and it's not like Urseg's, a fantastic elite level wrestler or top position grappler, but he does have the advantages here. It's clearly the smartest path to take. And so this fight is kind of, if anything, more than anything else, it's an IQ test for Urseg here. So yes, we've seen him try to go out there and strike before, but I think we will try to see him actually grapple in this one. I do hope that he doesn't end up, getting with the crowd involved and stuff and playing up to that because, they get into a firefight and the crowd will be happy for that. I hope he actually, goes out there and sticks to the routine strategy. If he does get the grappling going, I don't know how well he's actually going to be able to hold Kai down. I think he can get some takedowns here. I think maybe we see a situation where they scramble back to the feet, he gets him back down, scramble back to the feet, kind of hold him in the clinch. Stuff like that can help win the rounds, even if he's not actually getting the dominant position on the mat. But I think he actually does have the potential to actually get him down past the guard and actually land a real submission here. That is not out of the question. I just think that there's still a decent chance that we're actually going to end up hitting the scorecards as they both end up kind of neutralizing each other out quite a bit. So on the feet, I think Urseg could have some success, but obviously that's the path of most resistance. I think he would be smart to go for the grappling. I think he will do that. I just still think that he's not going to be particularly dominant in that regard. I think there's an outside chance at a sub, but I think more likely we see him use the takedowns, the clinches, some control to end up getting a close, somewhat competitive decision, one that he still clearly wins, but not one that is ultra dominant. As for the next bout, we have another one that actually could be somewhat of a similar bout, in my opinion. We have Mateusz Gamrot taking on Dan Hooker. As for the odds, Gamrot, huge favorite, minus 355, comeback on Hooker, plus 275.
Man, this is a fight that's perplexing me, right? Because on the one hand, I have to write about some of these fights from a daily fantasy standpoint. And I think that, there's a good chance that Gamrot, if he wins this fight, is like one of the highest scorers on the slate, just because we haven't seen Dan Hooker tested by a guy who really wants to go out there and wrestle all night. It's just not really been the matchmaking. I mean, if you look at the lightweight rankings, there's just not that many of those guys. And the guys that are like that, Islam Makhachev, he just took him down, and that was the end of the fight, pretty elementary from there. However, is that really beyond the pale? We've seen a lot of guys, Islam gets on top, and it's just step one, step two, step three, and it's over. Even Drew Dober, it wasn't even a real move, right? He just squeezed the shit out of him, and he was like, oh, get me out of here. So you think of a guy like Islam, it's just a really dangerous top player. Bobby Green also just got smothered, right? Like there wasn't really a move that happened. He just was getting everything past and getting beat up with short shots, and they were like, let's just stop this before it gets any worse. And I think that when you're looking at a fight like this on paper, I had said last time out, I thought RDA was going to beat Gamrot. And after the fact, you could think I'm a fool, but I said what was going to happen. It happened like I thought, and it just didn't continue to happen like I thought. And what I mean by that is I said, I'm predicting him to go out there and hit an intercepting knee in round one. Everybody knows what Gamrot wants to do. He wants to go out there and wrestle. These guys aren't foolish. And they're like, if he starts the wrestling chain, it's probably going to be a disaster for me. So let's try and kill this guy on the way in. You got a guy with in Dan Hooker, who has multiple knockouts in the UFC via knee to the head, right? Like somebody's coming in, Ross Pearson, Jim Miller, just like throws the knee as they step in, bink, dead, and they just fall over, right? He's kind of been that guy. And when you look at how he's going to approach this fight, he's a guy that has 2 knockdowns in his last 2 UFC fights. He's got 9 knockdowns in his UFC career. So he goes out there and he hurts people, right? He's been knocked down a handful of times, but he's more often than not the more durable party when he goes out there to fight. Mateusz Gamrot has been knocked down 5 times in 9 UFC fights, which is just shocking for an elite fighter. And when you look at how he performs, it's an anomaly, right? Most guys can't go shoot 11 takedowns once they've been rocked in the first round. He just finds a way to recover. I think he's on some insane, designer drugs. Y'all look into that yourself. But my man just never gets tired, right? Like no matter what point they're at in the fight, he could just find another recover and keep going. Look at the Beneil Dariush fight, guys. I always point to this one as a specific example. He gets hit with an overhand left that would have killed a gorilla, right? He falls back over and then his body just restarts again. It just looks like, and he just sits back up like Undertaker and goes again. I was like, oh my God. But if you guys go back and watch that, listen, Beneil Dariush lines up this punch from, 10 yards behind him. He like slow pitches it like it's a softball and it hits him on the head and the dude flops to the ground. He just finds a way to keep pushing, right? But I think that when you have a guy like Dan Hooker, he presents a lot of interesting challenges. Number one, RDA is a little bit older, but he's had so many fights that when you get a guy that's just trying to take you down and you don't have that same level of motivation anymore, he stopped trying to get up. He just eventually gave up in that fight, in my humble opinion, right? He would work a little bit to his feet and the guy just trips him back down. He wasn't really trying to win at a certain point. He just said, I need to get to the end, get me back in an easier fight, get me at 170. I can't do this shit with these young guys no more. Dan Hooker says he wants an opportunity, right? Like a big next fight. He went out there against Jalen Turner. Everybody thought he's a lamb to slaughter, myself included, by the way. And Jalen Turner went nip and tuck with Mateusz Gamrot, split decision. He went out there and not only was in dire situation after dire situation, gets hurt badly in the second round with a head kick. He then finds a way to recover, get on top of Jalen Turner and nearly submit him to end round 2, come out there and beat him up in round 3. He's a guy that has pretty good cardio, right? If you look back, most of the fights he's had with elite lightweights, he wins the takedown battle. So do I expect that to happen here? God, no. My thought is it's either going to be Mateusz Gamrot takes him down and styles on him, makes it look easy like he's Islam Makhachev and he's the real elite lightweight, or it's going to be another Gamrot fight where he's going to give the guy opportunities to hurt him. He's probably going to get knocked down at some point, and he's going to need to rally and get 15 takedowns and hold this guy for dear life, because if it comes down to who did more damage, we've seen him lose to Guram Kutateladze on a split decision. Guram's not this guy who's going out there world beating, right? He went out there against Vucenic and just went to a very close decision in his UFC debut. And this is like 4 years into his UFC career. So I just think of a guy like Gamrot as very good fighter with obvious known flaws. And he gets priced very prohibitively because he's got wrestling, which is like consistent path. But a lot of his wins are a little fluky. I say this as a guy who bet Gamrot in some of these fights. Like the injury where Fiziev just like steps on his knee and it blows out. It was nice to cash it at the time, but also can I read into that he's a much better fighter? And if they ran it 5 times, he's going to beat him every time? I can't. So for me, there's just a lot of unknowns about Gamrot. And frankly, if I'm the UFC, I'm like, who can we find on this roster that can kill this guy? Because he's going to go out there, wrestle you to a 15-minute decision. He's got 2 finishes in the UFC, and they're over low-level guys that have been cut for 5 years. So I just think that when you look at this fight, he needs to go out there and either assert himself and say, listen, when you give me a guy who's not a committed wrestler, I'm going to take him down and submit him, and it's not going to be a problem. If he doesn't do that here, I think he's going to have a hard 15 minutes. I think the crowd's going to be completely against him. I think if Hooker lands anything of substance, they're giving him the round. That's a dicier proposition than a guy like RDA, who did have real moments in round 1. He just couldn't sustain it. He's like 36, 37 and had 50 fights already,
Yeah, and this one I see actually kind of negatives about both guys. In the case of Gamrot, his nickname is Gamer. That's for a reason. As you mentioned, he gets rocked all the damn time. Like this dude's nickname is fitting. But that's not kind of a good thing. Like in a way it is, because it shows that he actually, rallies from his struggles and that. But it's kind of like, I can't remember who said it, but some fighter many years ago said, I never want to be known as a guy who has a great chin because that means I get hit a lot. And it's like, yeah, that's actually kind of true. And in the case here, it's like, Well, we know that Gamrot is a gamer because he gets hit, he gets rocked by basically anything that touches him. He's always in close fights, regardless of how big of a favorite he is. Even when he's an underdog, he makes it for a close fight. Look at the Armin Sarukian one. I was actually at that fight live, and it's in the Apex, so it's very, very small. There's maybe like a, I don't know, a couple other dozen people there. And so we were basically pretty much all interacting with each other, talking. And everyone who asked me my opinion, I was like, well, Armin should win on paper. I think that I'll score the fight for him, but this is like a plus 250 price on Gamrot. It's probably going to be a super close fight. Wouldn't be surprised if they rob him. Oh, what do you know what happened? Armin goes out there, should have won, and it ultimately comes down to a round where Gamrot was dropped. They ended up giving him that round somehow, and that ended up being the deciding factor there. So Gamrot, even when he's a decent-sized underdog, that's kind of the case from him. He's just one of those guys. And there's certain fighters who have styles like this. They just make fights close, regardless of if they're the favorite, the underdog, if there should be dominant or it should be close. It's just their style. And so in the case of Gamrot, very clearly seems to be his style. So laying almost 4-1 on a guy like that definitely gives me some pause, to say the least. In the case of Dan Hooker, I think there's generally some reasons to believe that he's kind of a shot fighter. He has seemed to turn the clock back a little bit lately. He's had some better performances, but I don't think they're going to be particularly lasting. Maybe there's some, post-USADA love there, some special sauce in his system. I'm not sure what the deal is, but seems like maybe he's been a little bit better, but he had looked like very, very shot in recent years. So I'm still not expecting, the best of Dan Hooker anytime going forward. On top of that, I did a fight film episode for Islam Makhachev in the past, and one of the fights I covered on there was his fight against Dan Hooker, amongst others. And something I pointed out there is, yes, Islam's extremely dominant here. He completely buzzsawed through him without, basically literally any resistance. However, what other strong wrestlers, grapplers, besides Islam Makhachev has Dan Hooker fought? I said in that video, and it remains now, even multiple years since that fight, he just hasn't really fought any wrestlers or strong grapplers for the most part. Generally speaking, he's out there against the Dustin Poiriers of the world. And spoiler alert, those guys are still able to take him down if they really try for it. So I think here in this fight, what we're going to see is Dan Hooker go out there, try to do what Dan Hooker does, which is basically force us into a brawl, get the step and knee going, get the reactive knee as well that you mentioned. He is good with that, multiple KOs, as you said. The Ross Pearson one in particular, one you mentioned there, he was losing that fight. He was actually struggling. He was getting beat up in the boxing, and he uncorked that knee to be the difference maker. So he is a guy who has the ability to uncork a potent offensive maneuver when you least expect it, and that's something that, again, what did we mention about Gamrot? This dude just is like a magnet for getting rocked by the dumbest strikes you've ever seen. Would you be surprised if it's 29-28 Gamrot seeming, maybe a couple minutes away from that, and 90 seconds left, dude just runs face first into a knee, gets rocked, and now it turns 29-28 Hooker, or maybe even Hooker gets the stoppage, especially with the hometown advantage. That would not surprise me, honestly, at all. When you're seeing minus 355 out there, you really shouldn't be having thoughts of, do I think he's actually going to get the decision? You should be pretty confident in that. But again, this is a man who all he does is go out there and have very close competitive fights. So on one hand, we have Dan Hooker who gets buzzsawed anytime he actually faces a real grappler, but it was Islam, it's not like, it was some only decent grappler. It's one of the very best in the entire division. So on one hand, you kind of can't fault him too much for that. But anytime we've ever seen him against the other sort of mid-level or lower level or decent grapplers, he still actually kind of struggles a bit with them as well. So I think on paper, yes, Gamrot should be favored here. I definitely think he should have the minus in front of his price and everything like that. But should it be minus 355? I just think that's too high, honestly. So I have not laid the money on Dan Hooker. I almost want to kill myself just thinking about laying money on Dan Hooker in the year 2024, especially against a top-ranked opponent. But man, I'm going to look forward to into this fight more tonight. And honestly, I might end up actually laying some money on Dan Hooker in the year 2024 here. Anything you want to add, Liam?
Yeah, man, it would be one thing if there's a huge age gap between these two guys and it's Gamrot, the young killer, against, old man Hooker. But the truth is, in terms of being a shot fighter, the number one thing people talk about is you're slow and you get hit on the chin. This guy was out there going with Jalen Turner, having a fine fight, and he got hit hard on the chin multiple times. I thought he was going to die because he went down to 145 against Arnold Allen and he couldn't take a punch. Right? He looked like a muscle freak and then just was getting hit one time on the chin and doing the dance. But even in that fight with Arnold Allen, he got hurt so bad and he starts throwing back. He never actually went out and went down. It was kind of crazy. He was up on his feet getting beat up. And I think they just were for the sake of his family, let's intervene. But he's such a tough bastard, man. You've got to kill the guy. In the Islam fight, the other thing I'll point out, Islam had his arm all the way behind his back, ready to snap it in half, right? The referee intervenes. There was no tap. There was no verbal submission. He just was like, dude, you're going to get your shoulder snapped in half. And Dan Hooker's like protesting to him, like, dude, it's my shoulder. Let it get broken in half. Like, he's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like that guy is built differently, right? He's cut from a different cloth than most people. So when you talk about somebody willing to go out there and fight for your money, yeah, Dan Hooker's gotten cleaned up a couple times, but think about Edson Barboza, Dustin Poirier, what he was willing to give. He went out there and gave everything he had, right? He might have died along the way. He gave everything he had. Plus 300. Those are the kind of guys where I'm like, okay, I'll give you a chance.
In terms of this question here, if Dan finishes, would you say it's later on in the fight? I could honestly see it happening at any point. I could literally see it being like a 15-second win. Like the way that Gamrot gets hit, as you mentioned, some of the punches that he gets hit with, it's not like Cain Velasquez back in the day. He fought Czech Congo. That was a prospect matchup for him. Congo was like the veteran. Cain was still the decided favorite. I think he was like 2-1 or something like that. Supposed to be, a tough test, but one he should go out there and win. He gets hit by, like, if you've not seen that fight, go back and watch that fight. He gets hit by the most absurd clean shot that literally takes his chin over his own shoulder. He does not go down. He kind of buckles slightly and then keeps going forward, gets hit with another right hand clean on the chin, and then still gets a takedown despite it and survives. Everyone after that fight was like, oh my God, fraud check, basically. I mean, people weren't using the term fraud check yet back then, but basically that was what people were saying. It's like, oh, okay, and he's totally a fraud because he basically ate the biggest nuke you've ever seen and then still survived and went on to dominate the fight, as a matter of fact. That's not what we're seeing from Gamrot. Like he gets hit by slow punches, by punches that seem to have nothing on them, and he's just down every time. Like anything that hits this man clean, he's going down. And even sometimes when they're not that clean, he's going down. So that's something you need to note with him, is that he's a guy where it can literally be any point in the fight. It can be a round shifter or possibly even him getting finished. So again, if you listen to my past breakdowns of Dan Hooker recently, like I basically buried the dude for being seemingly shot. Again, maybe he's turned back the clock a little bit. We've seen some better performances like the Jalen Turner one. Surprise there for sure. Definitely surprised me in that one. So maybe he can turn back the clock a little bit here again. Again, he's going against a guy who is, even in best case scenario, probably going to be in a competitive fight for him. So I just can't understand why you'd lay minus 355 here. I definitely think it's a dog or pass situation. As for the next bout, we have Tai Tuivasa taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik the favorite at minus 240, Tuivasa plus 195.
Familiar theme for me. I think that this line is just a little bit too wide, right? When you look at Tai Tuivasa, here's the bearish case. Like the reason you'd be really afraid of betting on a guy like Tai Tuivasa. He looks like he's been a little fat and happy lately. Looks like he's made a lot of money outside the cage. And he's a guy that, he's got drink companies, weed companies. He's just doing a lot of different businesses. And so you have to ask yourself, how serious and committed is he? But he went to Dubai. He did a camp with Gokhan Saki. And he does look like he got in slightly better shape for this one. I haven't seen the weigh-ins. I have to go back and watch that, see if he, trimmed down a little bit, because he did look like a pear in his last couple fights and looked like he wasn't trying as hard as in some other fights, right? You could see his change over time in demeanor and physicality, right? And the Tabora fight, I thought, was on the low end of that scale. What he did in terms of the cage work was actually okay until it hit the mat. He was doing a lot of damage to Tabora on the feet. He stuffed the first couple takedown entries, but he's a zero on the mat. You put him on the ground, he didn't know what to do. So you take his back, he was like staying tough, right? He just was in a rear naked choke for forever against Tabora. So he had no idea what to do. He's like trying to just stay tough and, getting stretched out. Do I see Rozenstruik doing anything similar? No, I do not. Do I see him doing what Volkov did and taking him down multiple times, by the way? Because Volkov had him down and he did scramble up to his feet one time. Then Volkov did it to him again. What was Volkov doing? He was using his huge length to catch the kicks. So Tai is very insistent on the calf kick in his fights because he likes to get guys to respect that calf kick. And then when they go to set their feet, check it, whatever they go to do, he goes to, thwack them with 2 or 3 big hooks. That's kind of his show closer, or hit him with the elbow, right? Grab a hold of them in the clinch, bang him out with the elbow like he did against Derek Lewis. He's been very bad as an underdog throughout his career. But then you look at the guys he's fought along the way. It's Cyril Gane. It's Pavlovich. It's all the top guys in the division that were able to get over on him, right? He's on an 0-4 streak against top 10 guys in the division. So then, when you look at what Tuivasa is lacking, Tuivasa is lacking, it's a ground game and it's, an ability to fight past 8 minutes. But when you look at this fight, does he need either of those things to win it? I don't think he does. I think no matter who wins this fight, I expect more often than not, we're done in 2 rounds. I don't think that, Rosenstruck last time was fighting Gaziev, who didn't want to fight him. I think Tai Tuivasa only wants to fight him and just be done with it as quickly as possible, one way or the other. You shake my hand if I win. I shake your hand if you win. He doesn't care. Even look at the Greg Hardy fight where he goes out there and is just swinging and banging with Greg Hardy. He gets hit with one shot and then says, hold this, and kills him. I think that the danger is a guy like Rosenstruck can make you pay with one shot, right? The death touch, we call it. He goes out there and hits guys very hard. He once punched a hole in Alistair Overeem's face. I brought that up this week. I was like, anybody remember that when he just punched Alistair and then there was a hole in his face right after? Crazy. But it was in the 5th round of a fight he had done nothing in, right? You had talked about his inactivity when we were in the pre-show meeting, and that is a huge problem with Rosenstruck is sometimes he goes out there really aggressive. And by the way, that doesn't always work for him. He went out there really aggressive against Volkov and got countered very quickly, and then the fight was stopped. So it's like he's done that, and it's worked out. He's cleaned up Alan Crowder and Arlovsky in 30 seconds, but then he goes out there fast against Volkov, and he was the one on the wrong end of a quick knockout. You look at Tai Tuivasa was plus 200 against Volkov, who dominated both these guys. Now he's plus 200 against this guy, who doesn't have the same skills, size, ancillary metrics as Volkov. And by the way, the one thing about Rosenstruck is we've seen it's not always the technical guy, the really savvy, sophisticated. Francis Ngannou is an anomaly. He's got a ton of power. We know that. But if you guys revisit that fight, he threw these punches. And the guy
the worst punches
instantly.
I've ever seen.
It's not even real strikes. Like he's literally just straight arm throwing and chased it. So he's like following after him, like, and he misses multiple. And the one that connects, he just kills him. And you see Rosenstruck trying to be technical in that moment. He's like trying to step back and leg kick. Like you can't step back and leg kick an oncoming tractor trailer. And so
literally,
when you
he tries to counter
leg
kick to like offset his base. That's literally he doesn't even try a counter punch. He does an inside leg kick to offset his base. It does nothing, and he just gets immediately duped. Like one of the worst.
He took one step back through the leg kick, and then he was like, "I should have taken more steps back."
Yeah. Like you thought he was just gonna debase him, like deplete him with the leg kick. Like, oh, I hit a small little inside leg kick on this 265-pound man charging forward. Thought he was just gonna flick off like a booger or something. Like, dude, what do you expect to happen? One of the worst, like, it was very short, but one of like the worst technical moments in MMA history.
No doubt about it. And then you think about the fact that he was lined very closely with Cyril Gane and just went out there and, watch the fight pass him by. So there was a time when people were like, cut Jairzinho Rosenstruck. This guy doesn't even do nothing, right? You give him 5 rounds to work. He does nothing over 5. But then he went out there and tried to be more aggressive against the Dawkises and these guys in the division. I just think when you got a Tai Tuivasa, he's either retiring, right? Or like losing this fight and his career is probably over, or he's going to go out there and find a win. And when you look, Jairzinho is a little bit more like the matchups he's won in Australia than the ones he's lost. I'm saying Jairzinho is definitely a peg above a Rashad Coulter and these guys, but he's a guy that's going to go out there and trade with them on the feet and give him an opportunity to win by knockout, which he has done twice in Australia. Meanwhile, on the other side, he's lost to like former champion JDS, I think, and then, Sergey Spivak and what's his name? Volkov that took him down and submitted him in Australia. He's had mixed results, right? But when you look at this fight, he went and did a training camp in Dubai. And he's saying, like, I'm coming in for this fight to try and get something back from these last couple performances. Either you believe him or you don't. At plus 200, I think it's a little bit easier to say, I'll give you one last chance because he's getting fired if he loses. But on the other side, the thing that's kept me back from this, that's made me a little bit nervous, is that his brother-in-law, who he's business partners with, Tyson Pedro, is 32. So he's similar age, right? And that's the other thing. Tai Tuivasa is the much younger guy. He's a guy that should have a bright future if he wants it. But he's a guy that has all these other options. And his brother-in-law was like, yeah, thanks anyways for the UFC. I'm done getting paid 20 grand to get knocked around in here. Like, and just pissed off to do other things for more money. And I think Tai could do the exact same thing right now. He's got a huge social following. He could just go drink beers and not get punched in the face for a living. So that's the downside. But if he still wants to do this and he says, I'm a banger from West Sydney, I'll bang on with anybody. This guy's going to oblige him in his home country. That seems like a chance for him to win. So I like the under in terms of how I view this fight. I think somebody's getting spilt, and I wouldn't be surprised by either guy going down. I just think Tai is naturally a more durable fighter. He took bombs from Sergey Pavlovich, stood up, took another couple. It's all bad because his defense isn't really there, but the guy's tougher than an old leather boot. gets hit in every fight and just stays in the pocket going. And you said you don't want that to be an attribute you're known for. But on the other side, Rosenstruck, his attributes aren't that great either, being known for too aggressive or not aggressive at all. It's like a little bit of Goldilocks syndrome. He can't find the right balance.
Yeah, I look at this one almost like you're looking at like a UFC video game screen where you're like, all right, I'm going to select Tai Tuivasa, you're going to select Rosenstrike. It's like we look at the stats, and it's like if you look at like the bars, clearly Rosenstrike's like better basically every possible way. He's better at counters, better reflexes, faster and more explosive with an individual punch, probably more powerful with individual punch, probably more durable as well. Obviously, neither of them have much of a ground game, but not really a disadvantage there, at least for Rosenstrike, like he would have against some other opponents where obviously, you're looking at it and going, well, if he gets taken down, he's totally effed here. Not quite the case in this one. Should get a striker's delight here in this matchup. So if you're looking at like the video game loading screen, it's like, man, Jairzinho Rosenstrike should absolutely demolish Tuivasa in this matchup. But here's the thing. Once the match actually starts, one person is going to have their controller in hand and the other person isn't. The person without is going to be Rosenstrike, because as we've seen time and time again, unfortunately with him, this man just stares there like a video game character missing the controller. Just stares and stares. And hey, there's an opportunity to counter. Nope, just kept staring. Oh, there's an opportunity, could have flurried. Nope, just kept staring. Hey, you've done nothing for 4 minutes. Your opponent hasn't done too much. You could probably win this round in the last minute, maybe actually win the fight. No, just keep staring. Like, that's what this dude does. It's not even a matter of like, oh, okay, he's a slow starter like a Cheeto Vera, and you counted him giving away the first round, but then he always picks it up in maybe late round 2, early round 3. No, it could be round 3, it could be round 4. Yes, the Overeem performance, like you mentioned, where he tore the giant cut in his lip and everything. Well, the problem with that is he did literally nothing for however many minutes it was. That was in the end of the 5th round when that finally happened. He was on his way to losing one of the most one-sided, boring decisions you've ever seen, where the man just did not do a thing. Finally decides to throw a punch with a little bit left, and then gets the knockout, gets the stoppage. So that's the story of Jairzinho Rosenstrike. You look at his stats, you look at his attributes. Yeah, he should go out there and clobber a guy like an Andrei Arlovski, but he also should be going out there and clobbering better guys as well. But then he just doesn't throw. So in this case, I worry about one thing with him, which is that maybe he just doesn't throw much. And obviously, he's not going to have the crowd on his side. If there's going to be any bias, it'll be against him. He's not a particularly fan favorite anywhere he goes, but especially here. So if he's not going out there and stopping Tuivasa, is he actually going to out-volume Tai and route to a decision? Is he going to actually be able to win rounds here by barely doing a thing in enemy territory? I don't know about that. And so you're talking about, a steep price on him as the favorite here. That seems sketchy. And then even if he does go out there and be more aggressive, like you mentioned, sometimes he can actually go out there and be a bit more aggressive than you'd even expect or desire from him. Well, does he really want to get into a wild brawl against a guy like Tuivasa, who you brought up the Greg Hardy fight? Tai got rocked there, didn't care, didn't give a damn, went and rocked Hardy right back. Like, that's who Tai Tuivasa is. That's not who Jairzinho Rosenstrike is. He does not like to get hit. He does not like, if he gets rocked, he doesn't react well. It's a very different situation here. So if you look at the path to victory, it almost kind of reminds me a little bit of the Israel fight here, where you see one fighter who clearly is the better technician, but is it actually going to play out in terms of the aggression, the pace, the round to round? And I do worry here that Tai Tuivasa might go out there and just simply either out-volume Rosenstrike or just catch him with something, because Rosenstrike is, again, just sitting and waiting and looking for that literal perfect shot. Maybe the perfect shot comes at some point. Maybe he's losing 14 minutes of the fight. Somehow we get to the end of round 3, and he uncorks, similar to the Overeem fight, the game winner there. I mean, that could absolutely happen here, but man, would you want to be laying around 2-1 chalk on that? It's kind of like the Gamrot fight. Who do I think should have the minus in front of their number? I agree with the odds makers. They got it right. But should it be this steep? I don't know about that. So Jairzinho Rosenstrike will be my official prediction. He should probably get the job done by knockout if he actually throws a punch, probably a left hook. But, again, laying 2-1 on that, having the faith in him to do that. I mean, this is a guy, if anything, I would rather, have him be in a spot like this where he's the underdog and I'm going, okay, yeah, he doesn't have good volume. Yeah, he does have the kind of way of shooting himself in the foot, but he does have that live underdog kind of one-punch knockout power, that counter ability. Maybe he's live at plus 200. That's more the spot I want to be betting with Jairzinho Rosenstrike. A guy who goes out there and just completely shits away winnable fights. I don't want to lay 2-1 chalk on him, especially in this type of matchup. So officially, the prediction is Jairzinho Rosenstrike, but as for a bet, it's another one that I do think it's a dog or pass. Anything to add to that, Liam?
Yeah, I had one interesting note, which is surprisingly, this is like shocking information. Jairzinho Rosenstrike is 6-0 as a favorite, but the ROI is 75%, which means he's been a very small favorite in a lot of these fights. So he's gone out there and delivered against a lot of older fighters, against a lot of shot guys,
Andre
against
last
a lot of undersized fighters. And I do worry that there's a little bit of regression due on that side because it's heavyweight at the end of the day. And it's not like he has this well-rounded game where it's like, oh, if this goes wrong, he's going to fall back on his grappling. He's going to fall back. He doesn't really have that. So it's like a guy like that, does he really have the ancillary skills to justify huge favorite prices in a sport this volatile? Doesn't seem like it to me.
Yeah, and some of the performances you mentioned, like where he's done well as a favorite, like look at it, it's like Andrei Arlovsky, who has no chin, and not only that, like at least in the past, Arlovsky never had a chin, but in his prime, he used to at least have some ability to try to fight through adversity. At least he would attempt at times. Sometimes he would just kind of go down like a sack of potatoes, of course. But now you'll see him just like take the first clean shot and just turtle up and not even attempt to continue fighting. Like he just totally phones it in, and that's what we saw against Rosenstrike. Tai Tuivasa is not the type of guy, as you mentioned. You saw, again, the Greg Hardy performance. He'll get rocked and then just rock you right back almost instantaneously. So it's definitely a different type of dynamic than some of the other more easy fights that Rosenstrike has had as a favorite. Again, though, did you officially pick Rosenstrike as well? We both are on him?
I actually picked Tai Tuivasa here because I think it's a 50-50 fight, and I lean towards the betting value on Tuivasa. So for me, give me the home guy. Give me the guy who needs to win right now. Rosenstrike will be fine in terms of he'll get another 5 fights in the UFC if he just keeps win one, lose one, that type of deal. Whereas Tai Tuivasa, you can't lose 5-6 fights in a row in the UFC. They're just going to move on from you at a certain point, especially with how much he gets paid. So.
Yeah. So split on the pick, but we both agree dog or pass. So one thing I'll add too about the whole outside the cage aspect with Tuivasa, you mentioned he has multiple other businesses. You know, people criticize Dana White when he says, "Oh, the UFC, it's not a career, it's an opportunity." For some fighters, yes, it is a career, like an Israel Adesanya or a champion. For so many fighters, it's actually true what he's saying. Look at all like the female fighters who are just completely middling, like not good prospects, but they go on to get a bunch of main cards and they turn into a successful OnlyFans career. We have a bunch of fighters that were on the male side who same deal, and they turn it into a weed business. That's kind of like the male version, I guess, of it. You see with Tuivasa, you see it with O'Malley. There's multiple fighters who have their own weed business now. So it seems to be that the whole, opportunity, not a career thing is definitely true for some fighters. And it seems like once they hit that point where they start making the other money outside the cage, you'll either even hear them say in interviews and stuff, I don't really need fighting anymore, than this. And again, like I mentioned with Israel, when you hear fighters stop saying, well, I want to win here, of course, but I don't really need to. That is not a good sign, and that's probably a reason why you're seeing Tai Tuivasa on a multiple fight losing streak. So just another thing to factor in there. But again, officially, I will go with Rosenstrike, but if you want our official plays, of course, check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Fury's Fight Picks. As for the main card opener here, we have Carlos Pradas at -355, taking on Li Jingliang at +280.
I think Carlos Prates is a cool dude. He's out there smoking darts and breaking hearts, right? Yeah, exactly. So far he's had 3 UFC fights, right, between Contender Series and the big promotion, and he's got 3 knockdowns, 3 finishes. The guy's just been an electric factory. Does he have a minute winning style that makes you confident in a -400 price tag? No, right? Like he's a guy that basically relies on setting up the right shots, hurting people when he does land, but he can let guys get a little bit ahead of him on the strike count. We saw that in some of his fights. But when he lands, he's very devastating. And you got a guy in Li Jingliang hasn't been finished with strike. So it's like here opens up this interesting dynamic. The problem for me with getting behind a guy like Leach in this spot is manifold. But when I look at him, he's a great fighter. He's got a lot of talent, a lot of skills. A lot of his wins as an underdog came against elder statesmen of the division. When he was a little bit younger, when he was a little bit fresher, a little bit earlier in his career, when he was on the roids before other people realized you could do that, he was just having these kind of great, situational matchups. I bet 10 units. Again, we talked about average bet size. You can look at my average bet size versus how big I went on the Leach against Muslim Salikov. I was like, wait, he's bigger, he's better, he's stronger, he's got the better grappling, he's got the better striking. I was like, where does he lose this fight at +150? Let me find out for a big amount, right? I look at this fight and I say to myself, does he have a chance to win? Of course he's got a chance to win. It's the Leach, right? He could go out there and knock people out, power in his hands, experienced guy, been around a long time. But we also know about the Leech. He can get put on the back foot a little bit. He can get guided around. I mean, he just went to a very competitive decision with Daniel Rodriguez, who's been on, probably a lesser portion of his career over the last recent run. I think that's fair to say. Then you look at, where is a guy like Carlos Prates at? Number one, he's extremely experienced coming into the UFC. A lot of guys come in, they've got 8 fights, 9 fights. So they fight a 20-fight veteran. It's like blowing their hair back. This guy has had a lot of fights. He had meaningful fights outside the UFC. So he's had a soft entry to the UFC. That's why he's killing everybody, making it look super easy, highlight reeling them, not being very, focused, a little lackadaisical. I think in this fight, he's going to give Leech the respect he deserves. I think he's going to try and hit him with huge counters. I think his knees are devastating. I think his punches are clean, crisp. Leech likes to throw a lot of big overhands, a lot of big lean into the shot, step into it, a big looping arc on his shots. And Prates is a lot more tight with his shots, a lot more snap, a lot more linear striking. And I think that all that's going to be very effective for him, whether it's the knees, whether it's the kicks up the middle, whether it's the straight punches. And the other thing about him, he's coming out of Fighting Nerds, a gym I like, a gym I respect, a gym I think they're working hard, a gym I think they're taking the right supplements, and they're coming out and getting wins, going out there and earning it the hard way. The thing about Prates that we know is he's dangerous on the feet. The thing about Prates that I feel is not priced into the market necessarily is the fact that he's extremely dangerous on the ground. He doesn't take it there. He's a killer. He likes to go out there and have a, crazy fight. And that is where you open up, hey, Leech got power, could be a dangerous spot. But I think if they engage on the mat, I actually trust a guy like Prates to be a little bit more dangerous based on the footage I watched when he was competing in Russia. He had gotten submitted a few times early in his career, and I think that left a sour impression in people's mind. But in some of these fights where he went to decision, he's out there nearly submitting good fighters that are undefeated multiple times. So I think that he's a guy that has real skills in all positions, and I think he's a good fighter. Deserved favorite, crazy line now, right? It's just like you have a guy like Leech, the line's a little bit too wide. I just think that Leech coming off of injuries, surgeries, problems like that at his age, hard to project a better performance than what we've seen lately. And what we've seen lately has just been okay. It's been enough to take out the elder statesmen in the division, but against the young contemporary guys, hasn't always worked out. And he's needed to cheat his way out of some really bad positions, gouge the eyes, do a bunch of crazy shit. If you've been following the Leech for, 8 years rather than just the last couple. So he's turned into a fan favorite, but he's done a lot of scumbag moves and he's kind of relied on some cheap maneuvers to stay in fights when things were getting dicey for him. So I think that he's going to fight for your money, but he might just be a little bit past his sell-by date. I think he's turning into the fighter he used to be cashing me those plus money tickets against, which is an elder statesman who's probably going to find his way out the door sooner rather than later. So I like Leech, respect him, but for me, Prates is the pick.
Yeah, I agree. Prates is the pick. Again, line probably a little bit high, like some of the other ones we mentioned here. I don't really have too much to add about the style matchup. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Lee, with his injury he's coming off of, he hasn't fought in a while now. About a year ago, he's supposed to fight Michael Chiesa, had the spine injury, been out since then now. The injury he had, I don't have the exact one, but I actually have something pretty similar to. I've had almost 20 operations on it now. I have to get every 6 months, basically the nerves fried off. They inject this gigantic needle into it that's hollow, and then they put another needle inside of that is electrified, and they burn off the nerve, and that's how you kill the pain. And so I get that done every 6 months, and then I'm functional. So from what I've read about his injury, it's actually somewhat similar to that. So he has nerve pain going down his arm and stuff, and he's got some numbness and weakness. Apparently, if he's fighting back now, it seems to be at least mostly fixed. But what I can tell you about those types of injuries, they don't ever really go away. It's more about, okay, I found a way to make it manageable, tolerable, but there's always adjustments. There's always sort of little shortcuts you take in different movements and that to try to make up for it and try to not strain yourself. So given the serious nature of what Lee suffered there, I'm not expecting him to come back being as good as ever. I'm expecting there to be some issues with him. Maybe it's not super apparent, like, oh, his movement isn't all, janky and disjointed now or something like that. But there's probably going to be some effect on it, potentially also with back injuries like that. When you get hit, as the force can kind of reverberate through your body, it can also affect your back again, even if you're not getting hit in the back. That's something that I had noticed before when I had not related to my surgery, but just having back issues when I was younger. If I would take a hit somewhere that was unrelated to it, my back would actually end up hurting after that. This is before I had the proper treatment. My back would end up hurting just because the force would kind of reverberate through your body. So think of what is connected to the spine. It is your head, your brainstem, all of that. This dude is going to be taking punches from a professional MMA fighter trying to knock him out. hard to see why that's not going to cause issues on his spine. There's a reason why when you see fighters have serious neck or spine injuries, it's usually effectively a career ender. Maybe they stick around and keep fighting. They're very rarely the same, and it's very apparent. So he's a guy who already was getting up there in age, getting up there in fight years. Now we have a potentially devastating injury, which we have not seen him back since then, going against a tough opponent who stylistically, it's not like it's a good matchup for Lee, regardless of those issues. I mean, even if he was the best version ever for him, this is still a tough matchup. So if you're looking at Lee's path to win, basically just try to land a big shot, a lucky punch. I mean, I guess if somehow he could get on top, maybe he could do some ground and pound, some work from there, but I don't see that really happening. Like, I think he's just going to basically go out there and get outfought and basically be coming down to a lucky punch. And he's probably a guy who, again, I don't know what his durability is going to be like. I don't know what his sustainability is going to be like over the 3 rounds. Maybe his cardio is an issue. Because, again, you have to think with these fighters, especially a guy like Lee, it's not like he's, some Conor McGregor, Israel type who is going out there making big money and doesn't really need to fight. He's a guy who's kind of just getting by. He's someone who, in all likelihood, if he sits there and knows, okay, look, I'm not close to the same. I'm a shell of myself, but this is my job. This is my way to make real income for my family. He has multiple kids now. He's going to go in there. He's going to get in the cage, and he's going to try to do things regardless. So that's something you have to be aware of with these types of fighters. A guy like a Conor, now that the position he's at, or another big-time fighter, they're a bit more likely to pull out because obviously, they have a lot more to lose. They lose their belt, their legacy is on the line, all that kind of stuff. A guy like Lee, where it's primarily money motivated more than anything, you'll see, and again, not naming names, but being around Vegas and stuff, being around fighters who train, dude, you'd be surprised how often fighters go into fights knowing full well that they're going to lose, but it's basically just like, maybe I can get lucky, maybe land a lucky punch. At least I get my show money. Like, look at TJ Dillashaw against Aljamain Sterling. This dumbass bet on TJ Dillashaw against Aljamain Sterling because I didn't know the dude had literally a dangling shoulder going into that. Like 30 seconds in, it falls out. I was just like, that's a loss. Like, what are we doing here? And TJ Dillashaw said, going into the fight, he's like, yeah, I basically knew I was screwed, but hoped I could basically do something in like 90 seconds or something. So you'd be surprised how many fighters actually go into the cage basically expecting to lose. So again, we already have a kind of a not great matchup for Lee, not unwinnable, but not a great matchup for him. And for me, man, just looking into all of the spine stuff, there's actually been multiple articles and stuff, people going very in depth on it. If you're more interested in learning about it and seeing quite how devastating it is, dude, I just can't imagine with all of his pinched nerves and other issues he has that he's going to get hit in the face, which is going to directly send shockwaves down that spine, and that's not going to further cause issues in the fight. Again, not saying he's going to go out there and like be stretchered out randomly because he just becomes disabled in the middle of the cage, but again, as somebody who's had issues with my spine in the past before, you'll be surprised at how much that makes you not want to do whatever you're currently doing when that pain starts interacting. It's a very like deep core pain. It's not like, oh, my elbow hurts a little bit. When it's in your spine and everything basically you have moves based relative to that spine, if he's having problems with that, this is just going to be an even worse situation for him. So I think Lee's probably going to get finished, probably by knockout. So Pradas, I think we'll get the job done here. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to say all that much about him as in terms of a prospect or what his future is. But as far as the other fights here, we're done with the main card. Is there anything else you'd like to tackle? Anything from the prelims that stands out to you, Liam?
I don't think so. Let me just glance at the prelims and see if anything jumps off the paper. I think Luana Santos and Casey O'Neill is a fun fight. Kind of the rubber meeting the road for 2 female prospects, right? I think for Luana Santos, there's a little bit more rope, right? If she loses this fight, there's a rebuild process for her. She's 3-0 in the UFC, but on the other side, Casey O'Neill, it might be a make or break fight for her. And I was always low on her coming into the UFC, and she way exceeded my expectations, went on like a 5-0 run, moved to the US, got some good training partners, and tried to do things right. But she suffered an ACL tear about 2 years ago now, and I don't think she's ever looked the same since. Obviously, it remains to be seen here. She went out there and fought Jennifer Maia. She fought tough girls, but that last time against Ariane Lipsky, she was getting bodied with the judo. She was getting taken down. She was getting dominated. She was getting beat up. And I think all that maybe doesn't portend well against Luana Santos, who's got a lot of flaws defensively, but offensively, her judo is fun. It's good. And her striking is kind of crazy. So I think there's a lot of live finishers on this prelim card, and I'm excited to break down those props tonight.
Well, speaking of OnlyFans models who are middling prospects, if there's not a finish in that fight, I'm sure there'll be a finish afterwards over on our page. So it's one thing you have to be aware of with MMA these days, it's like most of the female prospects, if you want to call it that, are just here to basically make only. Like, dude, again, being around fighters in Vegas, I have literally met female fighters at gyms who straight up are open. They're like, I'm just trying to get to the UFC. I don't care if I go 0-3 so I can promote my OnlyFans. Like, this is like a direct path for so many women now. They're like, try to get to the UFC just to promote my page. Like, something you need to be aware of. But nothing else to add for any of the prelims or anything, any other notes here, Liam, before we get out of here?
No, I would say if people are on the Patreon, they'll see the navigation documents. And obviously, that's going to continue updating all throughout the night. I'm going to be up working until probably the morning. So I hope everybody enjoys the card. I'm sure that I'm going to as well. But in the meantime, I'm still going to enjoy the process. I got a lot more research to do. So I'm excited about it. Right now is when every book has their odds up. Everybody is ready to go in terms of liquidity limits, things like that. So I'm excited to see if we could get some good bets down.
Yep, definitely looking forward to the card. Should be a fun one in terms of the stylistic matchups here. You know, sometimes the UFC, you can look at the card even beforehand and go, okay, probably not likely to be that exciting. This one definitely has some banger matchups, especially on the main card. So hopefully it plays out in a fun fashion. Hopefully, more than anything, though, of course, it is another profitable night for the bets. Again, we are on pace to make over 100 units this year, over 400 units lifetime by the end of it as well. All third-party tracked and verified. Average bet size only 1.75 units, so not like we're padding our records. So check out all the bets for the UFC up right now. Also, of course, we do bet on the other events as well. PFL, Bellator, Octagon MMA, you name it. So it's all over there on patreon.com/Fury's Fight Picks. Pre-fight shows, post-fight shows, betting articles, fight film, all sorts of stuff. Check it out there. Otherwise, I'll be back following the event to do one of those post-fight shows. That'll be exclusive over to the Patreon. No live stream for that one, at least not this time. Maybe in the future. But other than that, for Liam, I'm Luca Fury, and thank you for watching.